Okie dokie, so I just wrapped up my playthrough of Final Fantasy III on the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Collection for Switch. My first ever playthrough of this game, as I said with the last two games as well. Now, Final Fantasy III I actually did. I bought the Nintendo DS version way back when it first came out. I want to say, was it 2005, maybe 2006? And I kind of briefly played through that. I can't remember, couldn't tell you off the top of my head how far I got. Probably not much more than when you get the airship and break through that rock. For a specific reason, which is that I found the graphics to be quite ugly. Even back then, and God, this is getting close to 20 years ago, I already found that the kind of that earliest generation of 3D graphics was aging pretty nastily, especially on the DS, because those graphics like weren't even up to N64 caliber. It was kind of like, it looked almost like the very first generation of like PlayStation 1 almost, and I just found it, the entire experience, visually unpleasant. And even back then I remember thinking like, why can't we have kind of like the equivalent of like a Dawn of Souls, like something that looks like a Super Nintendo version of this game? That would be what I would actually like to play. And that is something that did not exist until just now. Well, I guess not now. I guess the Pixel Remaster came out, last year on computer, but I didn't play it until it came out for console, because I did notice I specifically wanted the portable handheld version of this, which is how I do a lot of the playing of these Pixel Remasters, taking my Switch around when I'm at home with the TV. Especially now, it's generally going to be a Tears of the Kingdom that I'm playing, but I like to take the Switch with me. And I'm becoming a peak gaming boomer in that, like, playing a lot of 3D games on the handheld like kind of gets me a little bit headachy and visually confused. So I don't like playing Tears of the Kingdom on a handheld mode, or really anything 3D. Earlier this year I had a Metroid Prime remastered, and I found it damn near unplayable handheld mode, as my brain couldn't do it. So playing on the TV is for 3D games. Playing handheld mode is for your 2D, your sprite-based games, which is what my Final Fantasy 3 was perfect. Now I will just clarify again. This is basically the same thing I said about the last two games. I didn't use any of the boost features that this version of Pixel Remaster has built in, namely the increasing your experience points or gold, or turning off the random encounters, any of that. I played through the game all natural style, didn't touch any of that. Although what I did use is the kind of built-in features for the Pixel Remaster, namely the auto dash by holding B, the automatic battling by pressing Y, and the using the mini-map, which admittedly did help in a few little sections. That using the mini-map probably did borderline on kind of a easy mode cheating for like the Ancient Labyrinth dungeon in particular, in which you could just kind of hit Y and see basically where all the treasure is and all the false paths and whatnot. And speaking of cheating, I will admit that compared to Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 2, which I tried to play relatively blind, I peeked at a guide a few times if I wasn't quite sure where to go next, like an FF1, figuring out where to go to that desert to use that Levistone and get the airship. Little things like that. I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna spend hours crisscrossing this map to find the right tile I need to, or right NPC I need to talk to advance the story. Here, I admit that once I got off the flying continent, I was kind of I don't know if it was just a mood thing. It was just kind of like maybe wanting to get through this so I could either get back to Tears of the Kingdom or just move on to Final Fantasy IV. I admit that once I got off like the flying continent, the first half or so the game is on, I did mostly kind of follow along with a guide. Yeah, I don't know. If that means I didn't really beat the game in an authentic way to you, then I accept that. But yeah, I pretty much, not so much, following maps and boss guides, but just kind of like, go to this place next. Okay, once you do this section or this town or this dungeon, go to this place next. Then go to this place. I just kind of followed along, so I was kind of like, I just kind of looking to get through this. So anyway, moving on from the those technical details of my experience with the game to actually talking about the game itself. Obviously, I'm not the first person to make this fairly straightforward observation, but Final Fantasy 3 does feel very much like a Final Fantasy 1 version 2.0, right? It just basically does that game, but more, in a sense. More jobs, obviously, almost at least 3, maybe even almost 4 times as many jobs. More towns, not necessarily more dungeons. They're both kind of dungeon crawlers to some extent. Maybe about the same number. They are not even bigger, more streamlined, I'd actually say. The dungeon design does feel like it's kind of getting a little bit more towards the design we would see in the Super Nintendo games in a certain sense compared to FF1 and FF2, which had more sprawling maze-like dungeon design, especially 2 with its false rooms, whereas 3, it feels a little bit, they are designed with a little bit more purpose. Like even, for example, getting to the final dungeon, the World of Darkness or whatever the hell it's called, you have the 4 directions, and it's basically just each direction is just one big room, then the boss at the end of each one, so it's not really wasting your time in that sense. Only 1 or 2 of the dungeons in the whole game felt particularly big, and some of them felt downright quaint, like just like 3 or 4 pretty small rooms where you go to the stairs, and I didn't mind that so much. It's a bigger is not necessarily better type design philosophy, which I usually agree with. Like, I don't think that Donkey Kong 64 is better than Mario 64 just because the worlds are 8 times as big. Similarly, I don't think it's a bad thing at all that the dungeons were a little more streamlined here. But whereas I probably preferred the dungeon design in this game to Final Fantasy II, I will say that unfortunately I did see this game as a fairly meaningful step back from Final Fantasy II narratively. And even in a sense compared to Final Fantasy 1, which it's largely similar to, in that your stories just have basically nameless, faceless, voiceless characters. They have a few lines of dialogue in this game, but they're not differentiated in any way really, but it's just basically these nameless, faceless protagonists, their inexorable journey to face like a Dark Lord from ruling the world or whatever. But even Final Fantasy 1, it kind of had checkpoints, it felt like, in a sense, with your defeat of the 4 elemental fiends. Tiamat, Kraken, whatever, Lich, Fire Lich, whatever, and so on. Whereas Final Fantasy 3 doesn't even have that. But yeah, compared to Final Fantasy 2, which did have, it had a narrative that involved an introduction, it had distinct characters, not terribly deep characters, they're not going to win any Pulitzer Prize for characterization, but NPCs you met repeatedly through the game, like Princess Hilda and Prince, what was his name, Gordon, and Manwu or whatever, the White Mage, and so on and so forth. Villains who appeared multiple times, whether it was your own friend Leon turned evil or the Emperor himself. This structure that involved, the Empire pushing our rebels back to this fringe town, retaking the castle, campaigns against the Empire, visiting the Emperor's home castle, fighting in the arena games, stuff like that. It did have kind of a narrative that felt like it had ebbs and flows, and the Empire attacking the towns with the cyclones and destroying them and so whatnot. Whereas FF3 just kind of feels a little bit more like just stuff happens. Yeah, just it didn't really have it felt like it had a structure, There was never any real clear grasp of the threat. I mean, even now I couldn't necessarily tell you what the world is being threatened with, other than the cloud of darkness was going to send darkness over the world, or the villains like Zand or Zande or whatever his name is. You didn't meet him until the end. You just kind of heard about him. Yeah, I don't know. And it's I couldn't. What were the set pieces really in the game? It would be hard for me to even tell you that exactly. Yeah, other than when you leave the floating continent, which is kind of a neat thing, and suddenly you're on this greater map. That's cool. But yeah, there's definitely a lack of a kind of dramatic punch. It felt like to me. There were bits and pieces of characters I liked, like the 4 old men who mistakenly thought they were the legendary heroes. That was fun, but overall, Final Fantasy 2, you could go from Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 2, and is Final Fantasy 2 compared to Final Fantasy 4 in terms of character depth or narrative? No, but I think you can see that stepping stone. You can look at 1, then look at 2, and see, I'm seeing the road of growth in these games of storytelling that will take us to 4, whereas 3 felt like, oh no, now we're back down to the bottom of that valley again. Now there's not really any characters, and the plot is fairly minimalistic once again. And gameplay wise, it's, I don't know. I mean, certainly I'm glad to get rid of the this weird little system for Final Fantasy 2 where you're leveling each weapon and spell for each character individually. But the job system, if I'm in this game in Final Fantasy 3, if I'm comparing it to Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy 5, there's this quote from the film Gangs of New York where Bill the Butcher says to one other character,
"You are neither cold nor hot. So because you are lukewarm, I will spew you out of my mouth."
And that's maybe a little bit how I feel about Final Fantasy 3. I mean, certainly Final Fantasy 5 came up with the true genius idea of having characters gain permanent class abilities and stat increases from jobs they're doing. So you almost never felt like you were wasting time with a job. You're almost always building towards something, and it gave you the ability to do cool things like have a monk or a knight with white magic, or mixing and matching abilities and classes a little bit, highly customizable. Final Fantasy 3 obviously doesn't have that. With each time you change a class, you lose all the abilities that you had access to with the previous class, which can be annoying when you have a character who's mostly a mage and you briefly have to turn them to a melee fighter. If you want to turn them back to a mage, then suddenly you have all your MP is zeroed out. I'm sorry, your spell charges, because we're back to that, unfortunately. But then even compared to Final Fantasy 1, yes, you can change jobs now, but Final Fantasy 1 had a way where choosing your jobs kind of it locked you into something. In a sense, it's almost like picking your gameplay style at the very beginning of the game, almost like the Quest for Glory computer games from Sierra or something like that. Whereas Final Fantasy 3 felt like it had its one kind of toe in each pond a little bit, and not quite committed to either. And yeah, sometimes it could be annoying having characters in one class and that class is leveling up, and you're like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I wasting my time here? And admittedly, there's tons of classes I never even touched, like a bard I never used once, and several others. Mostly I just kept 2 characters as melee fighters. One is kind of a general purpose black mage, and my 4th character was a white mage for the entire game. Leveled that class up all the way to 99, I think, until it got Devout or whatever, and then Sage at the very beginning. So that character was always white mage, and the 2 were always melee fighters, and 1 was mostly a black mage, then gradually became a summoner towards the end of the game, once you got Bahamut and Leviathan. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of complaints, but overall, complaints aside, I did enjoy the game as a basic kind of like a zone out RPG. Like I said about all these pixel art remasters, I really enjoyed the look and the sound and the feel of it. Just good old JRPG pixel art towns will always make me happy. That's almost like my gaming happy place in a sense. And just the basic, exploring dungeons, going through towns, going shopping, running around doing battles, doing a little level grinding here and there. All that I did enjoy, and like I said, I did beat the game, obviously, and that's meaningful for me these days, because trust me, there's a great many games in the last 10 years or so I have dipped out of before the end. The number is huge, of all genres, of all eras, including some of the absolute most acclaimed, universally praised 10 out of 10s across the internet games the last few years. I just fizzled out very quickly, and it was just like, nah, it's just isn't really doing it for me. I could name some games like that would make the internet mad. And that are so acclaimed, so popular, so universally loved, that I just played for a few hours and I was like, it's not really my thing. I'm just kind of fizzled out on them. But FF3 I did complete at the end, so obviously the basic mechanics of it I did enjoy. Just the battles felt pretty good, especially I think if I was playing these on the original NES, this one would probably be my pretty firm favorite, just because the battles look a little bit more like the Super Nintendo style, with the bouncing damage numbers above the characters and whatnot. Obviously that comparison is moot in the pixel remaster versions, where they all pretty visually styled similar, with around the kind of a Super Nintendo sort of format of way the battles look. But yeah, so I have complaints within sort of the confines of what the game is, particularly narratively, where I felt like we had taken a step towards the Super Nintendo style JRPG narrative with FF2, and now we're back firmly into NES territory with FF3. But that's like I said, basic JRPG fun. I did enjoy it. And I will say that the bosses in this game, and even to some extent the random encounters, felt quite a bit tougher to me than Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 2, because I didn't do a ton of running or trying to worm my way out of battles. I pretty much fought everything I came across through the entire playthrough. And I was actually getting slaughtered pretty handily by bosses at a few points, particularly some of the optional bosses, like the first few times that I tried to fight Odin, which is funny that I even tried to fight him, because I don't think I ever actually used that summon once. I just wanted to beat it just so I had that feather in my cap. Killed me a few times. Bahamut also killed me several times. And then at the end game, some of the bosses in the World of Darkness killed me a few times. They were just laying down the meteors and the quakes and the flares, and I was like, God damn, these bosses aren't fucking around. They're hitting me for thousands of damage, hitting my whole party for thousands of damage, and I don't have that much more HP than they were hitting me for. And yeah, so I died several times. That's not a complaint. I actually liked it. I liked the challenge. I like having to rethink my approach and really strategize a little bit and lay just my most powerful white magic out as quickly as I possibly could, and kind of cross my fingers and hope for the best at certain points so they didn't use Meteor at the exact wrong moment to wipe me out. But yeah, Final Fantasy 1, I think I mentioned when I reviewed it on a little podcast I did a few weeks ago, I had 0 deaths through my entire playthrough, even through the final dungeon. Those 4 Fiend rematches went down so smooth and so easy. Final Fantasy 2, I had either 3 or 4 deaths. Now, this game I had... not like a countlet, but it was 10 to 15, probably closer to 15 deaths, wipeouts for the whole game. And I don't say that as a complaint. I appreciated the challenge. I appreciated that I actually did have to sit there and grind for 20 minutes outside of a few boss rooms to kind of build myself up a little bit. I probably wouldn't have appreciated that feature if I was playing the original NES, where apparently the last 3 dungeons, Eureka, the Crystal Tower, and the World of Darkness, you all had to do in one unbroken run. And if you died once, then it's back to the beginning with you. I could see that making me give up. Fortunately, this picture remaster did have the auto-save outside of each room, so the frustration was relatively minimal. And one thing that's pretty rare in JRPGs is normally you end up with the excess hundreds of thousands, if not even sometimes in extreme cases millions of extra gold pieces at the end of the game, with nothing really to spend them on. Here you could actually go to the one little shop at the bottom of Eureka, the third to last dungeon, and one of the mages sold the shurikens, the throwing ninja stars, however you pronounce that word. And it was I completely purged my entire purse down to where I couldn't purchase one more of them, and just filled up my inventory with 9 or 10 of them, because they were 60,000 gold each. And that was a good feature, and that actually was very useful because they hit close to 9999 damage on the final boss of the game, and helped smooth that out a little bit. So I did like a way to spend all your money at the end. Graphics, like I said, cool all around. Really enjoyed the look of it. The pixel artist for this pixel remaster did a great job. Music, I didn't like the standard battle theme as much as Final Fantasy 2. That one's been stuck in my head ever since I played the game. I could hum it right now. Here they leaned a little too much on kind of like this heavy guitar, sort of almost like a metal guitar, electric guitar sort of sound for the standard battle, which I found ever so slightly grating, but I did really like the overworld theme. So presentation, perfectly good. Yeah, that's overall it. I don't have anything tremendously deep to say about it compared to the first 2 games. Just kind of was what it was, a fairly straightforward medieval Dungeons and Dragons style JRPG adventure with knights and wizards fighting through the monsters and eventually fighting your way to the Dark Lord and saving the world. Was what it was. Overall, kind of looking back at this, what we would call NES Trilogy. I know I'm not playing them on the NES. I'm playing the Pixel Remaster, but you know what I mean. No, don't be pedantic. This NES Trilogy of Final Fantasy games. My true first impression is that Final Fantasy 2 is the best one in almost every way, except perhaps the most key aspect of gameplay. That is the weapon and spell leveling for each character system, making battles kind of stressful in a way, because you can't really enjoy using your whole set of magic because you just really had to focus on a few spells to level up. And yeah, it felt like it was a way that they meant to kind of broaden the game up, to open the game up, to give you infinite possibilities, but in a way it forces you to kind of narrowly focus on things, and almost made even the smallest battles a little bit stressful because you don't want to waste your turns not building up your character's levels. And the dungeons, like I said, a little maze-like. But in every other way, Final Fantasy 2 was definitely the best. Like I said, it actually had a narrative, not a deep or profound narrative by any means, but it did have a story with gradually building stakes as the Emperor started making more appearances throughout the game. Like I said, he brought in a cyclone, his castle rose from hell, that kind of thing, and recurring villains, and set pieces, like I said, taking back the castle from the Empire, pushing in the castle Finn, I think it was called, sneaking onto the Empire's dreadnought, etc., stuff like that. And in that sense, it did feel like it had sort of a narrative of sense compared to the other 2 games, and a good variety of locations too. Like it had the snowy northern lands, the castle from hell, the techno kind of feel of inside the Dreadnought, inside of Leviathan's guts, you know, that kind of thing. Despite everything I just said, I almost still have to maybe call it the third ranked of these 3 games, the weakest, just because of that damn leveling system, which is unfortunate. So I almost wish they would do like another version of it that maybe went to a more conventional level system and maybe shrunk the dungeons by about, 20% at least, to make something a little more streamlined and just less frustrating to play, because narratively I think it is the best, but just the gameplay problems make it a little bit less enjoyable. And if I had to sit down right now and replay one of these 3 games, I think Final Fantasy II would probably be the last one I would, which is unfortunate to say. Now, Final Fantasy 1 versus Final Fantasy 3, that's an interesting question, because Final Fantasy 3, despite feeling like an evolution of Final Fantasy 1, in some ways I would say I liked Final Fantasy 1 more. It felt streamlined in the sense, not so much the dungeons themselves, but just the structure of the game, where it's just the dungeon to dungeon feel of it. It truly did feel like less like we would think of a Final Fantasy game these days, and almost more like a Dungeons and Dragons Japanese spin on that in video game format. Just a true dungeon crawler, boss fighter, just stripping out any of the kind of a cruft of the JRPG genre, just straight to the basics, But that said, I also did enjoy the somewhat higher difficulty of Final Fantasy III, getting tested a little bit more. And especially the final stretch and the final bosses, those last few dungeons, and trying to take out the last few bosses. A good challenge there that felt like the game earned its happy ending after that point. It earned building up to that. But again, going back to that question of if you had to replay one right now, honestly, it might be Final Fantasy 1, just because it would be fun to kind of treat picking the classes at the beginning as a different way to kind of pick your difficulty level. Like I said, last time I did 2 fighters, so maybe I did 0 fighters this time. Maybe try like a black belt and a thief and a red mage and a white mage or something like that. Just to have a completely different experience. Whereas, so Final Fantasy 3 did enjoy it, but I enjoyed it in almost the same way as like I'd enjoy kind of like a fast food burger. Like the JRPG genre, it's like I know what I'm getting. It's pretty predictable. It's pretty down the line. It's hard to mess up. Well, I shouldn't say that, because there are a lot of JRPGs I've played throughout the years and been like, nah, this isn't doing it for me, and quit. But, it's a good, solid, classic era Squaresoft game that I enjoyed for what it was. And I did enjoy getting to finally play it the way I always wanted to, because I found both the original NES Final Fantasy aesthetics and the Nintendo DS Final Fantasy 3D version aesthetics to both be a little bit on the ugly side, frankly, just not what I quite wanted. It's just not right. What I wanted was one that had a Super Nintendo look to it, and so it's cool that we finally got this with Final Fantasy 3 Pixel Remaster. Decades in the making, so it's cool we finally got it. And it's been a valuable experience, I guess, getting to finally play through these 3 games to completion for the first time, because it's been something that's sort of been a missing piece of my kind of gamer history for decades now, and it's finally those 3 feathers are now in my cap. So that's neat to say. And like I said, I did them all pretty pure. I already admitted that I peeked at a guide plenty playing through FF3, but I didn't use any cheats in terms of the internal difficulty changes. They did everything, never increased experience points or gold or did any of that. So I played them all pretty pure. No, I'm sure there are hardcore NES Final Fantasy fans who might say that I didn't play Final Fantasy 3 pure because I didn't do the entire gauntlet and final boss rush without any saving in between, but I can live with that. So now what am I going to do next? Either go back to Tears of the Kingdom or, do what I've been really excited for and tear into Final Fantasy 4, because it's the exact polar opposite of these games that I had never played to completion before. It's a game I've played many, many times, and one of the most nostalgic games in the world to me, so I am looking forward to checking that out at some point. But like I said, I might prioritize Tears of the Kingdom first for the next month or 2, and then finally dive back into the world of classic Final Fantasy a little bit later in the year. But yep, that'll do it for now. Check y'all later.